What happens when the worlds of untouchable power and unseen skill collide? Meet Isabella Hawthorne, a CEO whose empire was built on cold, hard ambition. Her prized possession, a vintage Aston Martin, as beautiful and broken as she was. Stranded on a lonely road, she made a dismissive joke to the humble black mechanic who was her only hope. "If you can fix this engine," she laughed, "I'll marry you." She thought it was a punchline. She had no idea that sentence wasn't an ending, but the beginning of a story that would shatter her world, expose her darkest secrets, and prove that sometimes the strongest engines aren't made of steel, but of character. That a 1968 Aston Martin DBS was more than a car to Isabella Hawthorne. It was a statement. Its color, a deep British racing green, absorbed the California sunlight, refusing to reflect the garish optimism of the West Coast. It was old money, restrained power, a meticulously engineered piece of history that mirrored the image she projected from the 40th floor of the Hawthorne Innovations Tower in downtown Los Angeles. The car didn't scream for attention. It commanded it, just like she did. Inside the cockpit, the scent of worn leather and faint, high-octane perfume filled the air. But Isabella wasn't enjoying the drive. Her knuckles were white on the wooden steering wheel. Her jaw was a tight knot of stress that no amount of corporate yoga could unravel. A single, tinny sound from her Bluetooth earpiece had curdled the perfect morning. "Unacceptable, Isabella," her father's voice, thin and sharp as a razor, cut through the low burble of the V8 engine. Alistair Hawthorne wasn't just her father. He was the chairman, the ghost in her machine, the architect of the gilded cage she called life. The Kestrel project is 3% behind schedule. 3%. Do you have any idea what that does to our fourth quarter projections? "Dad, it's a temporary supply chain issue," Isabella said, her voice a practiced, calm veneer over a churning sea of anxiety. "I'm personally overseeing the solution. We'll make it up." "Don't tell me you'll make it up. Show me." "Sterling is closing the Virtutech merger. His board is happy. My board," he paused, letting the words hang, "is asking questions. Don't give them a reason to doubt my choice of successor." The call ended. No goodbye. Never a goodbye. Isabella snapped her head back against the headrest, a frustrated sigh escaping her lips. Her fiancé, Richard Sterling. Of course, her father would bring up Richard. Richard, the private equity shark with a perfect smile and an empty soul, was her equal in ambition and her superior in ruthlessness. Their impending marriage wasn't a union of love. It was a merger, a consolidation of power that would make them the undisputed titans of the tech industry. It was a deal, and Isabella always closed her deals. She pressed the accelerator, pushing the Aston Martin along the winding coastal highway. The engine, usually a symphony of controlled fury, responded with a cough. A violent metallic shudder ran through the car's frame. The dials on the dashboard flickered like a dying man's eyelids. "No, no, no, no," she muttered, her heart sinking. She coaxed the car, pleaded with it. But the glorious roar devolved into a pathetic sputter, then a series of clanks, and finally a groan of terminal silence. The magnificent machine coasted to a stop on the gravel shoulder, steam beginning to wisp from the seams of its long, elegant hood. Isabella Hawthorne, CEO of a billion-dollar tech firm, was stranded. Her first instinct was to call her assistant, have a flatbed, and a black car dispatched with military precision. She pulled out her phone. No service. Of course, the one stretch of coastline with notoriously bad reception. She looked around. Nothing but ocean on one side and dry rolling hills on the other. She did the one thing she hadn't done in years. She got out of the car and popped the hood herself. A cloud of acrid smoke billowed out, making her cough. The engine, the legendary Tadek Marek V8, was a tangled mess of chrome and wiring, and it looked as hopeless as she felt. It was a masterpiece of analog engineering, and her digital world had no solution for it. An hour passed. The sun grew hotter. Her tailored silk blouse was sticking to her back. Cars, modern and soulless, whizzed past, their drivers oblivious. Just as a sliver of genuine panic began to creep past her ironclad composure, an old, faded blue tow truck crested the hill behind her, its engine chugging with a reliable, unglamorous rhythm. It pulled over, its amber lights flashing, with a comforting lack of urgency. The man who stepped out was the antithesis of her world. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark skin glistening with a light sheen of sweat. He wore grease-stained overalls with the name Thorn stitched over the chest pocket. His hands, she noticed, were large and calloused, but they moved with a surgeon's grace as he pulled on a pair of work gloves. "Looks like you've got some trouble," he said, his voice a deep, calm baritone that seemed to absorb the frantic energy radiating from her. "You could say that," Isabella replied, her tone clipped. "Can you tow me to a garage? A proper one. Someone who knows how to handle a classic like this. A dealership, perhaps." The man walked over and peered at the engine, a low whistle escaping his lips. He didn't seem intimidated. If anything, he looked intrigued, like an art historian discovering a lost painting. "You won't find a dealership that'll know what to do with this old girl, ma'am. Not within 100 miles. Most of them just plug in a computer now. This," he gestured to the engine, "this requires a different language." He looked back at her. "My garage is about 10 miles down the road. Thorn & Son Automotive. We can take a look." Isabella sized him up. A small, local mechanic. The idea was almost laughable. Her car was serviced by specialists flown in from Europe. But she was out of options, out of cell service, and quickly running out of patience. "Fine," she conceded. "Just be careful with it. It's worth more than your truck and your garage combined." The man Thorn simply nodded, his expression unreadable. He didn't take the bait. He just went about his work, hooking up the Aston Martin with an efficiency that was both frustrating and impressive. As she sat in the passenger seat of the noisy utilitarian tow truck, smelling the faint scent of oil and honest labor, Isabella Hawthorne felt a profound sense of displacement. She was a queen in a foreign land, and for the first time in a very long time, she was not in control. The sign for Thorn & Son Automotive was hand-painted, the blue letters faded by decades of sun. The garage itself was a modest, two-bay brick building set back from the main road. It was the kind of place Isabella's world had forgotten existed. There were no sleek glass walls, no valets, no espresso machines in a pristine waiting room. There was only the smell of motor oil, the glint of well-used tools hanging in perfect order on a pegboard wall, and the quiet hum of a large industrial fan. Marcus Thorn backed the tow truck in, unhitching the Aston Martin with practiced ease and rolling it into the main bay. A younger man, probably in his early 20s, with a mop of curly hair and a perpetual look of awe, came out to help. "Leo, give me a hand," Marcus said. He introduced him to Isabella. "This is Leo, my apprentice." Leo's eyes were wide as saucers, fixed on the Aston Martin. "Whoa, boss, a 68 DBS? Is that the Tadek Marek engine? I've only ever seen one in a museum." "It is," Marcus confirmed, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "And right now it's a very expensive museum piece." Isabella stood awkwardly to the side, her arms crossed, her designer heels feeling ridiculous on the oil-stained concrete floor. She felt exposed, her armor of wealth and status rendered useless here. This was his kingdom, a domain of physical reality she couldn't manipulate with a memo or a conference call. "So," she said, impatiently lacing her voice, "how long will this take? I have a board meeting I absolutely cannot miss tomorrow." Marcus wiped his hands on a red rag, his movements deliberate. He walked slowly around the car, his eyes scanning every line, every seam. He wasn't just looking at a broken machine, he was reading a story. He ran a hand gently over the fender, then leaned back into the engine bay. For a full 5 minutes, he was silent, just looking, listening to the silence, his focus absolute. Isabella's patience frayed and snapped. "Look, Mr. Thorn, it's a simple question. Can you fix it, or do I need to make other arrangements?" Marcus finally straightened up, his gaze meeting hers. There was no apology in his eyes, just a quiet intensity. "It's not simple, ma'am. Something seized deep inside. Could be a thrown rod, could be a catastrophic bearing failure. The engine needs to be opened up. It's intricate work." "Intricate?" she scoffed, a condescending laugh bubbling up. "I oversee nanotechnology development. My company designs microprocessors the size of a grain of dust. Don't talk to me about intricate." Marcus didn't flinch. He just held her gaze. "With all due respect, ma'am, your microprocessors are mass-produced by machines. This engine was built by hand. It has a soul, and right now, its soul is hurting. The sheer, unadorned earnestness of his statement caught her off guard. Soul? It was a hunk of metal, a beautiful, expensive hunk of metal, but a thing nonetheless. The pressure of the day, her father's call, the looming merger, and the humiliation of her current situation. It all coalesced into a single venomous moment of arrogance. She looked from his grease-stained hands to his calm, dark face. She saw a simple man, a world away from the power players and billionaires she navigated. In her world, you asserted dominance. You put people in their place. A cruel, dismissive smile spread across her face. She let out a short, sharp laugh. A soul? That's rich. She took a step closer, her voice dripping with condescension, loud enough for young Leo to hear clearly. All right, Mr. Soul Mechanic, let's make this interesting. You seem to think you're some kind of engine whisperer. She paused for dramatic effect, sweeping her gaze over his humble garage. You fix this engine. You get this hurting soul of a car running perfectly by, let's say, 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, and I'll marry you. The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Leo's jaw dropped. He looked from the impossibly glamorous, impossibly cruel woman to his boss. It was a joke, of course. A vicious, classist, belittling jab meant to put him in his place. It was her saying, "You and I are so far apart that the most absurd, impossible thing I can think of is us being equals." She expected him to get angry or flustered, or maybe just laugh awkwardly and get back to work, properly chastened. Marcus Thorne did none of those things. He stood perfectly still, the red rag still in his hand. The silence in the garage deepened, broken only by the whir of the fan. He looked at her, and for the first time Isabella saw something flicker behind his calm eyes. It wasn't anger. It was something older, heavier. It was the quiet resolve of a man who had been underestimated his entire life and had long since stopped being surprised by it. He held her gaze for a long, uncomfortable moment, then a slow, deliberate nod. "All right," he said, his voice as steady as bedrock. "You've got a deal." Isabella's smile faltered. He had called her bluff. The sheer audacity of it was stunning. He was supposed to be intimidated. He was supposed to shrink. Instead, he had accepted her challenge, her insult, and turned it back on her with two simple words. For a split second, she felt a sliver of fear, but it was quickly replaced by amusement. Let him try. The specialists in Geneva took 2 weeks to do a standard tune-up on this car. The idea that this man, in this dusty garage, could diagnose and repair a catastrophic internal failure in less than 24 hours was preposterous. "Don't forget," she said, regaining her composure and adding a final twist of the knife. "Perfectly. I want it purring like the day it left the factory." 9 a.m., Marcus repeated, turning away from her and toward the engine. It was a dismissal. He had work to do. Isabella, feeling a smug sense of victory, called for a taxi. As she left the garage, she glanced back. Marcus already had a complex array of tools laid out on a clean cloth. He was moving with a quiet, focused intensity. He wasn't just a mechanic. He was a craftsman preparing for his masterpiece. A small, unwelcome voice in the back of her mind wondered if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She crushed it instantly. He was just a mechanic, and she was Isabella Hawthorne. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the garage floor, Thorne & Son Automotive transformed. The daytime bustle of routine oil changes, entire rotations ceased. The bay doors were rolled down, shutting out the world. Under the stark white glare of the overhead fluorescent lights, there was only Marcus, Leo, and the silent green beast on the lift. This was Marcus's sanctuary. The world of balance sheets, stock prices, and corporate power plays that Isabella inhabited was an abstract concept here. Here, the only things that mattered were torque specs, fluid dynamics, and the precise physical truth of metal under stress. "Leo, pass me the borescope," Marcus said, his voice low and focused. Leo, who had been watching with rapt attention, scrambled to hand him the thin, flexible camera. Marcus gently fed it deep into the engine through a spark plug hole, his eyes fixed on the small monitor. He was a surgeon performing an exploratory procedure. See that? He pointed to a faint scoring mark on a cylinder wall, almost invisible to Leo's untrained eye. And there, a slight discoloration on the number 3 piston head. Overheating, but it's a symptom, not the cause. For hours he worked with a monk-like patience. He didn't curse or throw tools. Every movement was efficient, every decision born of thousands of hours of experience. He had a feel for it, an intuition that couldn't be taught from a manual. He listened to the way a bolt groaned as it loosened, felt the subtle resistance of a worn gasket, and even seemed to smell the difference between clean oil and oil tainted by microscopic metal filings. Leo saw his mentor in a new light. He'd always known Marcus was the best mechanic around, but this was different. This was artistry. "Where'd you learn all this, Marcus?" Leo asked, breaking a long silence. "My dad taught me the basics, but this is next level." Marcus paused, wiping a film of oil from his brow with the back of his hand. He looked at the complex engine, and for a moment, he wasn't in the garage. "I used to be an aerospace engineer, worked on turbine combustion chambers for jet engines." Leo was stunned. "What? A jet engine engineer? Why would you quit that to fix cars?" "In that world," Marcus said, his voice distant, "you're a number on a spreadsheet, a tiny cog. You design a component, it gets tested by a computer, and sent to a factory you'll never see. You never get to touch the finished product, never get to feel the engine run. After my wife, Sarah, passed, I realized I wanted to build things, to fix things, with my own 2 hands. I wanted to see the result, to hear it." He tapped the engine block of the Aston Martin. "This is real." He had found the problem. It was as obscure as it was catastrophic. A custom-forged oil pump gear, unique to that specific year and model, had developed a hairline fracture. It wasn't delivering enough pressure to the top of the engine at high RPMs, leading to micro-seizures under load. Any other mechanic would have replaced the entire oil pump, a part that was nearly impossible to find and would take weeks to source. But Marcus saw the flaw in the single gear. "We can't replace it in time," Leo said, his shoulders slumping. "It's impossible." "Replacing it is easy," Marcus countered, a glint in his eye. "Fixing it is hard, and hard is what we do." What followed was a masterclass in ingenuity. Marcus didn't just have the tools of a mechanic. He had the tools of a machinist and a metallurgist hidden in the back of his shop. He carefully removed the damaged gear. Using a set of calipers and a micrometer, he measured its every dimension down to 1/1000th of an inch. He then selected a block of high-tensile chromium steel. For the next several hours, the garage was filled with the sounds of creation, the sharp whine of the lathe as he milled a new gear from scratch, the hiss and crackle of his TIG welder as he reinforced the gear teeth with a specialized alloy, a technique he'd learned from his aerospace days to deal with high-temperature stress fractures. He heat-treated the finished piece with a torch and quenched it in oil, his face illuminated by the glowing metal. Looking like an ancient smith forging a legendary sword, it was a perfect replica. More than a replica, it was stronger, better, improved by a modern understanding of material science that the original engineers in the 60s couldn't have dreamed of. As the first hints of dawn painted the sky pink and orange, they began the reassembly. Every component was cleaned, every gasket replaced, every bolt torqued to its exact specification. Marcus worked with the fluid grace of a man who had committed every nut and wire of this mechanical beast to memory. At 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before Isabella's deadline, Marcus wiped the last smudge of grease from the valve cover. The engine bay was immaculate, a work of art in chrome and steel. "All right, Leo," he said, his voice tired but filled with a quiet satisfaction. "Moment of truth." He slid into the driver's seat, the worn leather creaking under his weight. He turned the key. The engine didn't just start, it awoke. There was no sputter, no hesitation. A low, powerful, perfectly balanced hum filled the garage, a deep, resonant purr that vibrated through the concrete floor. It was the sound of a healthy heart, beating strong and true. Marcus gave the accelerator a gentle tap, and the hum swelled into a crisp, magnificent roar, a symphony of perfectly synchronized explosions. It was the sound of a promise being kept. Leo stood with a grin stretching from ear to ear. He couldn't believe it. Marcus simply leaned back in the seat, closed his eyes for a second, and listened. He had done more than fix a car. He had healed it. At precisely 8:59 a.m., a black town car, sleek and silent, pulled up in front of the garage. The rear door opened, and Isabella Hawthorne stepped out. She was back in her armor, a sharp gray power suit, hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face a mask of cool indifference. She had come to pay her bill and put this absurd incident behind her. She heard the sound first, that perfect, unmistakable purr. Her eyes widened slightly, the first crack in her composure. She walked into the bay and saw her Aston Martin, gleaming under the lights, idling so smoothly that a glass of water placed on the hood wouldn't have rippled. Marcus got out of the car and walked towards her, wiping his hands on a clean rag. He stopped a few feet away. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were clear and steady. He didn't say a word. He just stood there waiting. The engine purred. The clock on the wall ticked over to 9 a.m. He had done it. The humble black mechanic had done the impossible. And now, according to the terms of her own arrogant joke, she owed him her hand in marriage. The low, perfect thrum of the engine filled the cavernous silence of the garage. It was a sound that should have brought Isabella relief, but instead it felt like a judgment. It was the sound of her own arrogance being thrown back in her face. She stared at Marcus, her mind racing, searching for an angle, a way to control the situation. In her world, every problem had a price. Every person had a number. She just needed to find him. Incredible, she finally said, her voice a carefully modulated instrument of corporate poise. She walked over to the car, running a hand over the cool metal of the fender, refusing to look at him directly. I have to admit, I'm impressed. You're a very gifted craftsman. She opened her designer handbag and pulled out a checkbook. So, what's the damage? Name your price. And please, add a generous bonus for your time and discretion. She was already writing, the pen scratching against the paper. This was how she solved things. With money. It was a universal language, a solvent for all inconvenient truths. Marcus watched her, his expression unchanged. He didn't look at the checkbook. He didn't seem impressed by the offer of a bonus. I already named my price, he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of the entire garage. And you agreed to it. Isabella stopped writing. She looked up, a flicker of genuine disbelief in her eyes. Excuse me? You can't possibly be serious. That was a joke, a figure of speech. Was it? Marcus took a step closer. He wasn't menacing, but his presence was undeniable. You made a statement, a wager, in front of a witness. He glanced at Leo, who was trying to make himself invisible in the corner. You set the terms. You set the deadline. I met them. To me, a man's word, or a woman's, is the most valuable thing he has. It's not a joke. Isabella felt a surge of hot fury mixed with a cold dread. This was not going according to plan. This simple man was refusing to play by her rules. This is extortion, she hissed. It's absurd. Do you have any idea who I am? I know exactly who you are, Marcus replied calmly. You're the woman who made me a promise. I don't want your money, Ms. Hawthorne. A blank check means nothing to me. It just means you think my integrity, my skill can be bought. It can't. He wasn't asking her to walk down the aisle. He was doing something far more damaging. He was holding up a mirror to her, forcing her to see the casual ugliness of her words, the hollowness of her character. He wasn't after a wedding. He was after an acknowledgement, an admission that her word meant something. Panic set in. Her mind flashed to Richard, to her father, to the board. The scandal, the sheer, career-ending absurdity of it. CEO to marry local mechanic after losing bizarre bet. It was a late-night talk show monologue waiting to happen. It would destroy everything she had built. Let's be realistic, she said, her voice shifting from commanding to pleading. This is my life, my career, my own marriage is next month. To Richard Sterling. That sounds like a you problem, Marcus said, his voice devoid of sympathy. You made the offer. Desperate, she tried another tack. She ripped the check from the book. She had made it out for $50,000 and held it out to him. Take this for your trouble and for forgetting this ever happened. Let's be adults about this. Marcus looked at the check, then back at her face. He slowly shook his head. You still don't get it, do you? He turned and walked over to his workbench, picking up the small fractured gear he had replaced. He brought it back and held it in his open palm. This is why your engine failed, he said. A tiny flaw, a weakness in the core of the material that, under pressure, caused a total system failure. He closed his hand around the broken piece. A promise is like that. It's a component of your character. If it's flawed, if it breaks under pressure, well, the whole system eventually fails. He had completely disarmed her. He wasn't a greedy mechanic. He was a philosopher with a wrench. He had cornered her, not with legal threats, but with simple, unassailable morality. Her phone buzzed. It was Richard. The real world was calling. I have to go, she said, her voice barely a whisper. She couldn't look at him. She felt small. The car is fixed, Marcus said, tossing the broken gear onto the workbench with a soft clink. The keys are in the ignition. No charge. What? I don't want your money, he repeated. I did the work to uphold my end of our deal. What you do with your end is up to you, but a debt is a debt. Isabella fled. She practically ran to her car, the sound of the perfect engine now a mocking reminder of her defeat. As she sped away from Thorne & Son Automotive, she looked in the rearview mirror. Marcus was standing in the doorway of his garage watching her go, a solitary, immovable figure. Driving back to the city, her mind was a whirlwind. The problem hadn't been solved, it had metastasized. It was no longer about a broken car, it was about a broken promise, and the man she had made it to was not going to be easily forgotten. That afternoon, Richard Sterling strolled into her office, all polished teeth and Savile Row suit. Heard you had some car trouble, darling, he said, kissing her cheek without an ounce of warmth. Everything sorted? Yes, Isabella lied, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. Just a minor issue. It's fixed. Good, he said, turning his attention to the stock ticker on his phone. Because we have the pre-merger gala tonight, we need to present a flawless, united front. No distractions. Isabella looked at her fiancé, a man who saw life as a series of transactions, and felt a chilling premonition. She had created a distraction, a massive, ticking time bomb in the form of a humble mechanic with an unshakable sense of honor, and it was only a matter of time before it exploded. A week passed, and Isabella tried to bury the memory of the garage under an avalanche of work. She immersed herself in the Kestrel project, held marathon meetings, and finalized the last details of the Virtutech merger with Richard. She told herself the mechanic was a nobody, a fleeting problem who would surely fade away. He hadn't called. He hadn't sent a letter. The silence, she hoped, was acceptance. She was wrong. The silence was a coiled spring. The first tremor came in the form of a simple, registered letter delivered to her office. It was addressed in neat, block handwriting. Inside, there was no threat, no demand for money. There was only a single professional photograph of the broken oil pump gear he had shown her, resting on a clean white background. Below the photo was a single typed sentence, "A debt is a debt." Her blood ran cold. He wasn't going away. He was reminding her. This wasn't about marriage anymore. It was a psychological battle. He was chipping away at her conscience, a concept she had long considered a luxury she couldn't afford. She showed the letter to Richard, spinning a heavily edited version of the story. Some mechanic fixed my car, she said dismissively, and now he's got this crazy idea that I owe him something more. He's delusional. Richard barely looked up from his tablet. Delusional people can be a nuisance. What's his name? Marcus Thorne. Give me the address, Richard said, a cold glint in his eye. I'll have my lawyer, Mr. Davies, send him a cease and desist. We'll offer him $10,000 for his trouble and make it clear that any further contact will be treated as harassment. Isabella felt a flicker of unease. Richard's solutions were always aggressive, always designed to crush, not to resolve. But what choice did she have? Fine, she agreed. Handle it. 2 days later, a sleek black sedan pulled up to Thorne & Son Automotive. A man in a suit so sharp it could cut glass stepped out. This was Arthur Davies, Richard's personal attorney, a man who specialized in making problems disappear. He found Marcus replacing the brake pads on an old pickup truck. Leo watched nervously from the side. Mr. Marcus Thorne, Davies asked, his voice dripping with condescension as he eyed a spot of grease on Marcus's overalls. That's me, Marcus said, not bothering to stand up. I represent Mr. Richard Sterling and his fiancée, Miss Isabella Hawthorne, Davies began, opening his briefcase. It has come to our attention that you have been attempting to contact Miss Hawthorne. We are here to offer you a one-time settlement of $10,000 in exchange for your signature on this non-disclosure agreement, which stipulates that you will cease all communication immediately. Marcus finally stopped working. He slowly stood up, wiping his hands on his ever-present red rag. He was a good foot taller than the lawyer and seemed to take up all the air in the garage. He looked at the papers Davies was holding out, then met the lawyer's gaze. Tell your client, he said, his voice a low rumble, that my integrity is not for sale, and tell Ms. Hawthorne that a promise doesn't have an expiration date. He turned and went back to the brake pads. Dismissed, Davies stood there, sputtering, the NDA clutched in his hand like a losing lottery ticket. The lawyer left, humiliated and angry, and reported his failure back to Richard. Richard was furious. Who the hell does this grease monkey think he is? He snarled at Isabella over dinner that night at a Michelin-starred restaurant. This is a distraction we don't need before the merger. I'll handle this myself. The next day, Richard Sterling drove his own car, a menacing black Ferrari, to the garage. He didn't come to negotiate. He came to intimidate. He found Marcus alone this time. Thorne, he barked, striding into the garage like he owned it. Let's cut the crap. You think you're going to get a payday out of my fiancée? You think you're clever? Marcus calmly put down his wrench. This is between me and Ms. Hawthorne. Everything that involves her involves me now, Richard sneered, getting closer. You're nobody, a bug on the windshield of my life. You're going to take the money, sign the papers, and disappear, or I will make it my personal mission to ruin you. I'll have this place shut down for code violations. I'll have the IRS audit you into oblivion. I will bury you so deep in legal fees you'll be fixing bicycles for a living. Do you understand me? It was a classic rich man's threat, a brutal display of power. But Marcus didn't flinch. He had faced down much worse than a spoiled man in an expensive suit. You know, Marcus said, his voice dangerously soft, for a man who has everything, you seem awfully scared. That hit a nerve. Richard's face twisted in rage. He shoved Marcus hard in the chest. You don't talk to me like that. It was a foolish move. Marcus was a solid wall of muscle, hardened by years of physical labor. He barely moved, but the intent was clear. It was an assault, and they were no longer alone. Leo, returning from a parts run, had seen the whole thing from the doorway. His eyes were wide with shock and fear. Marcus simply looked down at the spot on his chest where Richard had shoved him, then back up at Richard's furious face. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't raise a hand. You need to leave, Marcus said, his voice flat and cold as steel. Now. There was something in his tone, a line that had been crossed, that finally got through to Richard. Defeated and enraged, Richard stormed out, shouting empty threats as he peeled out of the driveway, leaving the smell of burning rubber in his wake. Later that day, Leo was shaken. That guy's a psycho, Marcus. What are you going to do? Nothing, Marcus said. He showed his character. That's all. But Leo was a millennial. He was scared for his boss, and he was angry. He thought about the rich, cruel woman and her even crueler fiancé. He thought about Marcus's incredible skill and quiet dignity, and he made a decision. He pulled out his phone, found the email address for a well-known local investigative journalist, a woman named Jessica Finch, known for her tough exposés on the city's rich and powerful. He started typing. You're not going to believe the story I have for you, he wrote. He told her everything. The broken-down Aston Martin, the arrogant CEO, the impossible wager, the perfect repair, the refusal to pay, the threats. He hit send. The time bomb Isabella had created was no longer just ticking. The fuse had just been lit. Jessica Finch was a shark who smelled blood in the water from miles away. A story about corporate hubris, class warfare, and a powerful CEO's broken promise to a blue-collar hero. It was journalistic gold. She met with Leo, who recounted the events with wide-eyed sincerity. She then did her own digging, corroborating the timeline and identifying the key players. Isabella Hawthorne, the tech wunderkind, and her fiancé Richard Sterling, the piranha of private equity. She drove out to Thorne & Son Automotive herself. She didn't come as a journalist, but as a customer with a supposed engine rattle in her modest sedan. She watched Marcus work. She saw his meticulous care, his quiet professionalism. She engaged him in conversation, and while he never mentioned Isabella Hawthorne by name, he spoke about the importance of keeping one's word, about how a person's character is the only thing they truly own. His dignity was palpable. It was all the confirmation she needed. The article titled "The CEO, the Mechanic, and the $1 Million Promise" dropped on a Tuesday morning. It went viral before Isabella's first cup of coffee. It was a masterpiece of narrative journalism. Jessica Finch laid out the story in devastating detail, painting Isabella as an out-of-touch Marie Antoinette and Marcus as a paragon of working-class virtue. She included Leo's eyewitness account of Richard's threats and the lawyer's visit. The story culminated in Marcus's simple, powerful philosophy. A promise is a component of character, and without it, the whole system fails. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Isabella's phone began to melt down. Her father was the first to call. His voice wasn't just angry, it was apoplectic. "What have you done?" he roared. "You've made the Hawthorne name a laughingstock, a joke. Our stock is down 7% pre-market. The board is in an uproar. Dad, I can fix this." "You can fix nothing," he shouted. "You have been a monumental disappointment. You have jeopardized a multi-billion-dollar merger because you couldn't control your own arrogant mouth. You are to issue a public apology immediately, and you are to stay away from the office until I tell you otherwise." The line went dead. Next was Richard. He didn't call. He showed up at her penthouse apartment, his face a thunderous mask. He wasn't there to support her. He was there for damage control. "The Sterling-Hawthorne merger is headline news for all the wrong reasons," he yelled, throwing a tablet with the article onto her marble coffee table. "My board, my investors, they're spooked. They see this as a sign of instability, of poor judgment." "We can release a joint statement," Isabella pleaded, her world crumbling around her. "We can deny it, say the mechanic is a disgruntled employee." "Deny it?" Richard laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "There's a witness, Isabella. My visit to his garage is in there. You've made me look like a thuggish goon. You've made me look weak." He paced the room like a caged tiger. "This isn't about us anymore. This is about me, my reputation. The merger is off, and so are we." Isabella stared at him, stunned. "What?" "Richard, you can't. We've been planning this for 2 years." "The deal is dead," he said, his voice cold and final. "I can't be associated with this kind of PR disaster. My lawyers will be in touch with yours regarding the dissolution of our prenuptial agreements." He walked to the door, then paused. "You know, for someone so smart, you can be incredibly stupid. All you had to do was pay the man. But you were too arrogant. Goodbye, Isabella." The door clicked shut, leaving her in a silence more deafening than his yelling. In the span of a few hours, she had lost her father's respect, her job, and her fiancé. But the karma engine was just getting started. The story took on a life of its own. CEO Promise went trending on social media. People championed Marcus Thorne as a folk hero. A GoFundMe was started by strangers to buy Marcus a new garage, which he politely but firmly shut down, stating his garage was not for sale and he didn't want charity. Talk shows dissected her arrogance. Competing companies used the scandal as a morality tale in their own PR. The Hawthorne Innovations Board convened an emergency meeting. With Alistair Hawthorne's blessing, or more accurately, his furious command, they voted to place Isabella on an indefinite leave of absence, effectively firing her from the company she had dedicated her life to building. Isabella was left alone in her sterile, opulent penthouse, overlooking a city that now scorned her. She saw her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. A powerful woman brought low not by a corporate takeover or a market crash, but by a broken promise to a good man. She remembered his words as he held the broken gear. A tiny flaw that, under pressure, caused a total system failure. He hadn't been talking about her car. He had been talking about her. Her character had been put under pressure, and her entire life, a magnificent and powerful machine, had seized and crashed in the most spectacular way imaginable. She had hit rock bottom, and the only thing she could hear was the faint, mocking purr of a perfectly tuned engine. For 3 days, Isabella didn't leave her penthouse. The silence was a physical weight. The calls stopped coming. The world she had commanded had moved on without her, leaving her stranded in the wreckage. She drank expensive wine that tasted like water and stared at the city lights that now seemed to mock her isolation. In the depths of that self-imposed exile, something shifted. The anger, the humiliation, the bitterness. They began to burn away, leaving behind a raw, unfamiliar feeling. Clarity. She replayed every moment in her head, from the breakdown on the highway to Richard's cold exit. For the first time, she didn't see herself as the victim of a vindictive mechanic or an unfair media. She saw herself as the architect of her own destruction. Her arrogance was not a tool of power. It was a shield born of insecurity, a desperate attempt to live up to her father's impossible standards. Her relationship with Richard wasn't a partnership. It was a strategic alliance devoid of warmth or loyalty. Her life hadn't been a symphony of success. It had been the screeching of a machine running too fast, too hot, and destined to break. Marcus Thorne hadn't ruined her life. He had saved it by forcing it to stop before it completely disintegrated. He had shown her the tiny, fractured gear in her own soul. On the 4th day, she got up. She showered, but instead of putting on a power suit, she chose a simple pair of jeans and a plain black t-shirt. She looked at herself in the mirror. The mask was gone. All that was left was Isabella. She didn't call a driver. She took the elevator down to the garage, found the keys to the Aston Martin, and drove. She didn't know what she was going to say or do. She only knew she had to go back to where it all started. When she pulled up to Thorne & Son Automotive, it was a normal workday. Leo was changing a tire, and Marcus was bent over the engine of a beat-up station wagon. He looked up when he heard the distinctive purr of the Aston Martin. His expression didn't change as she got out of the car. He just watched her walk towards him, his eyes steady and searching. Leo froze, unsure of what was about to happen. Isabella stopped a few feet away from him, on the same oil-stained patch of concrete where she had made her fateful joke. The air was thick with unspoken words. "I didn't come to offer you money," she said, her voice quiet, stripped of its usual authority. It was just a voice now, not a weapon. "And I didn't come to make excuses." She took a deep breath. "I came to apologize. What I said to you, that joke, it was cruel. It was arrogant. It was a reflection of someone I no longer want to be. You were right. My word was broken. My character was flawed, and it cost me everything." She looked him directly in the eye. "You held up your end of the deal. You did something magnificent, and I repaid you with contempt. I am truly, deeply sorry." Marcus listened, his head tilted slightly. He studied her face, searching for the artifice, the hidden angle. He found none. He saw only a woman who had been through a crucible and had come out the other side, burned but somehow cleaner. He slowly wiped his hands on his red rag, the familiar gesture now seeming like a ritual of contemplation. "Apology accepted," he said simply. There was another long pause. The apology was necessary, but it wasn't enough. It didn't fix the imbalance. "That can't be it," Isabella said, a note of desperation in her voice. "I still owe you. A debt is a debt," you said. "I lost my job, my fiancé, but the debt remains. So what is it? What do you want?" Marcus looked at her, then at the station wagon he was working on. He looked at his own calloused hands, a slow, thoughtful smile, the first one she had ever truly seen from him, touched his lips. "You want to pay your debt?" he asked. He held out a heavy wrench. "The alternator on this thing is a nightmare to get to," he said, his voice a calm, instructional baritone. "The bolts are in a tight spot. I could use a hand. Someone to hold the light steady. Someone to pass me the right size socket when I ask for it." Isabella stared at the wrench as if it were a foreign object from another planet. A wrench. He wasn't asking for money or revenge or a pound of flesh. He was offering her a chance to do something real, to be useful, to serve. It was the most profound, most humbling, most terrifying offer she had ever received. It was a chance to start rebuilding, not her empire, but herself. Her manicured hands, which had only ever signed checks and typed on keyboards, reached out. Hesitantly, she took the heavy, greasy wrench from him. It felt solid, real, a tool for fixing things that were broken. "Show me what to do," said Isabella Hawthorne. And under the bright, honest lights of the garage, surrounded by the smell of oil and the tools of creation, the former CEO began to pay her debt, one greasy bolt at a time. The engine of her life was just beginning its long, slow, and difficult repair. And so our story ends not with a wedding, but with a wrench. It wasn't a fairy tale romance, but something far more real, a story of reckoning. Isabella Hawthorne lost an empire but found a sliver of her own humanity. Marcus Thorne didn't win a bride, but he affirmed something more valuable, his own unwavering integrity. This story is a powerful reminder that karma isn't a magical force. It's the natural consequence of our own actions. The promises we break to others are ultimately promises we break to ourselves. What do you think? Was the karma too harsh, or was it exactly what Isabella deserved? Can a person truly change after hitting rock bottom? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love reading your perspectives and your own stories of when life delivered a lesson right on time. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe for more tales of drama, twists, and real-life karma. Thank you for listening.